Security guards block Black Poet at Gala, but her words bring entire room to tears. No, you don't understand, I'm supposed to be here. Alina Jenkins clutched her worn leather portfolio to her chest, her voice trembling as three uniformed security guards blocked her path. The glittering chandeliers of the Maxwell Literary Foundation's annual gala cast harsh shadows across their faces. Behind them, the city's elite mingled in evening wear, crystal glasses clinking above the gentle swell of classical music. "Ma'am, your name is not on our list." The lead guard's voice was firm but not unkind. "And without proper credentials, but I received the invitation myself." Alina's hand shook as she fumbled through her bag. "I'm tonight's honored guest. Please just call Margaret Whitfield. She'll explain everything." The security guard exchanged skeptical glances with his colleagues. Alina, at 67, stood out sharply against the backdrop of wealth, her simple blue dress carefully pressed but decades out of fashion, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a modest bun. From inside the ballroom, a voice rang out. "What's the commotion here?" Alina recognized him immediately. Richard Maxwell III, grandson of the Foundation's founder, current chairman of the board, and the man whose signature was on her invitation. His expensive suit and confident stride parted the crowd as he approached. "Mr. Maxwell," the guard began, "this woman claims..." Alina's voice rose, dignity fighting through her humiliation. "I've been writing poetry since before you were born, young man. I don't need to claim anything." As cameras flashed and whispers spread through the gathering crowd, Richard Maxwell's face hardened. "I don't know how you got past the door downstairs, but this is a private event." Alina stood taller, her eyes glistening but her gaze unwavering. "50 years ago, your grandfather published my first poem when no one else would look at a colored girl's writing, and now you don't even know who I am." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. The weight of history, of privilege, of assumptions made visible in a single moment. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Alina Jenkins sat at her modest kitchen table, holding an embossed invitation she'd read a dozen times already. Alina's apartment was small but immaculate, walls lined with bookshelves built by her late husband, James. Framed photographs chronicled a life richly lived. Alina as a young teacher in the 1970s, standing proudly before her first classroom. Alina and James at civil rights marches. Their daughter Aisha's college graduation. Grandchildren's birthday parties. A vintage record player in the corner softly played Nina Simone. "You're sure this dress is appropriate?" Alina asked, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the blue silk she'd splurged on at Macy's last week. It had cost nearly a month's pension, but tonight was worth it. Her daughter Aisha, visiting to help her mother prepare, looked up from arranging a simple pearl necklace. At 42, Aisha had her mother's warm eyes and determined chin, though her corporate lawyer sensibilities showed in her practical bob and carefully neutral expression. "Mom, you look beautiful," Aisha said, her voice gentler than usual. "But are you sure about this? These foundation events are just wealthy people patting themselves on the back. They probably only invited you to check some diversity box." Alina shook her head, picking up the invitation with its gold-embossed Maxwell Literary Foundation logo. "Richard's grandfather was different. Harold Maxwell published my work when nobody would touch poetry from someone like me. When Harold died, things changed, but..." She touched the portfolio containing her newest poems. "This is my chance to remind them what literature is really about," Aisha sighed. "I just don't want you to get hurt." "The literary world hasn't exactly embraced you these past decades, which is precisely why tonight matters," Alina replied, tucking a photo into her portfolio, a black and white image of a young Alina standing beside an elderly white man with kind eyes. "Harold believed in me when it wasn't fashionable. Maybe his grandson will too." The buzzer rang. Her taxi had arrived. Aisha helped her mother with her coat, concern evident in her furrowed brow. "Should I come with you?" Aisha asked. Alina patted her daughter's hand. "No, dear, this is something I need to do myself." She straightened her shoulders. "Besides, how intimidating can a room full of poetry lovers be?" As the taxi pulled away, Alina didn't see Aisha watching from the window, phone already in hand, calling her husband. "She's gone. I'm worried this night is going to break her heart." Across town, in the penthouse suite of the Maxwell Publishing headquarters, Richard Maxwell III adjusted his bow tie before a wall-length mirror. At 52, his hair had distinguished touches of gray at the temples, his face bearing the confident expression of a man accustomed to boardrooms and banquets. "Final guest count?" he asked, not looking away from his reflection. His assistant, Thomas, scrolled through his tablet. 217 confirmed. Governor's attending. So is the mayor." Times is sending a photographer. The caterer upgraded the champagne as requested. Excellent. And our honoree? Jonathan Pierce arrived an hour ago. He's doing a pre-event interview with Literary Weekly in the library. Richard nodded approvingly. Perfect. This gala needs to outshine last year's. The foundation board is watching closely. He turned from the mirror, reaching for his jacket. The Maxwell Literary Prize still means something in this world of fleeting digital content. Tradition matters. There was one unusual RSVP, Thomas began hesitantly. An Alina Jenkins, she's not on our standard invitation list. Richard frowned. Jenkins, don't recognize the name. She claims she received a personal invitation, something about being published by your grandfather years ago. Grandfather published hundreds of writers, Richard dismissed with a wave. She probably misunderstood a general alumni newsletter. Make sure security knows only verified guests on the list. Yes, sir. Thomas made a note, hesitated, then added. She sounded elderly. Should I call her back to explain? No time, Richard interrupted. We have actual literary giants attending tonight. I can't be concerned with every amateur who ever had a poem in a regional anthology. As Thomas left, Richard's phone buzzed, a text from his college-age daughter, Sophie. Break a leg tonight, Dad. Wish I could be there. Love you. Richard smiled, feeling a momentary pang of regret. Sophie was away at Berkeley, studying literature and social justice, a combination that had led to increasingly spirited debates during holiday dinners. She declined to attend tonight's gala, calling it elitist pageantry. Richard pushed the thought aside. Sophie was young, idealistic. She'd understand the importance of tradition someday. Downstairs, his driver was waiting. Richard took one final look in the mirror, satisfied with what he saw the perfect steward of his grandfather's legacy. Alina's taxi pulled up to the glittering facade of the Westmont Hotel. She paid the driver, adding a generous tip from her carefully budgeted gala night funds, and stood for a moment taking in the scene. Limousines and luxury cars lined the circular drive. Guests in formal wear streamed toward the entrance, their jewels catching the light. She clutched her invitation more tightly, suddenly feeling every one of her 67 years. A young doorman smiled professionally as she approached. Good evening, ma'am. Here for the Maxwell Gala? Yes, Alina said, presenting her invitation. Alina Jenkins. The doorman scanned a tablet. I don't see. One moment, please. He turned away, speaking quietly into his radio. Alina waited, watching other guests walk past without being questioned. An older man in an immaculate tuxedo approached, his silver hair and commanding presence drawing immediate attention from the staff. Dr. Reynolds. The doorman's tone changed instantly. Welcome back, sir. Go right ahead. Dr. William Reynolds paused, glancing at Alina. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes. Are you also attending the gala? He asked, his voice carrying the measured cadence of academia. Yes, Alina replied, though they seem to be having trouble finding my name. Dr. Reynolds studied her. You look familiar. Have we met? Before Alina could answer, the doorman returned. I'm sorry, ma'am, your name isn't on our list. Alina held out her invitation. But I have this. Sent directly to me. Dr. Reynolds glanced at the invitation. If she has an official invitation, the doorman wavered. I'm supposed to check with upstairs for any exceptions. Exceptions? Alina echoed, her voice sharp. Dr. Reynolds frowned. I'm sure it's just a clerical error. Why don't you come in with me? I'm on the foundation's board. We can sort this out inside. Relief washed over Alina. Thank you. The doorman hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Alina walked beside Dr. Reynolds into the hotel's opulent lobby. I didn't catch your name, he said as they approached the elevators. Alina Jenkins. His step faltered almost imperceptibly. The poet, she smiled, pleasantly surprised. Yes, you've read my work. He seemed momentarily at a loss. Years ago, Harold Maxwell spoke highly of you. The elevator doors opened onto the hotel's grand ballroom, transformed for the evening into a literary wonderland. Book-themed ice sculptures, floral arrangements shaped like open pages, and enlarged quotations from famous works adorned the walls. Thank you again, Alina said, turning to Dr. Reynolds. I appreciate your help. He nodded distractedly, his gaze already scanning the room. Excuse me, I see someone I must speak with. As he walked away, Alina stood alone at the entrance, taking in the scene. A waiter offered champagne, which she declined with a polite smile. She opened her small clutch purse, touching the worn edges of her portfolio for reassurance. This was her world too, or it had been once. Across the room, Richard Maxwell held court among a circle of admirers. Alina recognized him from the Foundation's website and magazine features. She straightened her shoulders and began making her way toward him. She had taken only a few steps when a security guard appeared at her side. Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your credentials? And that brings us to where our story began, with Alina facing the security guards, her dignity under assault, and the evening's most powerful figure approaching the confrontation. "What are you doing here?" Aisha rushed forward to embrace her mother. "When you didn't answer your phone, I got worried. Then I started seeing posts online about what happened." She turned to Richard, her expression cooling. "Mr. Maxwell, you know each other?" Alina asked, surprised. "We've never met," Aisha replied, "but I recognize him. Maxwell Publishing rejected my firm's discrimination lawsuit against Westbrook Media last year." Richard's expression tightened. "That was a complex legal matter. It always is," Aisha cut in. She turned back to her mother. "Are you okay? Do you want to leave?" Alina shook her head. "No, for the first time in a very long time, I'm exactly where I need to be." She looked between her daughter and Richard. "Though it seems you two have some history to discuss." The door opened once more and Jonathan Pierce stepped out. "Alina, they're asking for you inside. The governor wants to present you with something." Alina laughed softly. "The governor wouldn't have known my name 3 hours ago." "That's how change happens," Jonathan said, "sometimes all at once after waiting forever." Alina nodded to Richard. "We'll continue our conversation another time." She took her daughter's arm. "Come, Aisha. You should hear what your mother's been writing all these years." As they moved toward the door, Richard called after them. "Ms. Jenkins, would you consider allowing Maxwell Publishing to release your complete works, including the manuscript my father rejected?" Alina paused, looking back at him. "That manuscript no longer exists, Mr. Maxwell, but I've written 7 collections since then. Whether they find a home with Maxwell Publishing depends on what kind of house you're building, one that honors your grandfather's courage, or one that perpetuates your father's caution." With that, she returned to the ballroom, leaving Richard alone with the city lights and the weight of legacy, both inherited and created. The weeks following the gala transformed Alina Jenkins' life in ways she could hardly have imagined. Her phone rang constantly. Her email inbox overflowed. Literary journals requested submissions. Universities invited her to speak. Publishers bid for the rights to her unpublished work. In her modest apartment, Alina sat with Aisha, sorting through the offers spread across her kitchen table. "Greenwood Press is offering the best advance," Aisha said, her lawyer's eye critical. "But Maxwell Publishing is offering a dedicated imprint, the Alina Jenkins collection. They want to republish your early work and release your new collections." Alina picked up Richard Maxwell's personal letter. "And a poetry prize in my name to support emerging voices from underrepresented communities." "PR damage control," Aisha said dismissively. "Perhaps," Alina acknowledged. "But does the motivation matter if the outcome creates opportunity for others?" Aisha studied her mother. "You're considering their offer. I'm considering what Harold would want, and what would create the most good going forward." The doorbell rang. Aisha answered it, returning with a package. "Special delivery from Maxwell Publishing." Alina opened it carefully. Inside was a beautifully bound book, a limited edition reprint of her first collection, Roots and Wings, with the original cover art. A note from Richard was tucked inside. "The first step in restoring what was lost. The board unanimously approved the Alina Jenkins collection and prize. The decision is yours, but I hope you'll allow us to be part of your journey forward, even as we acknowledge where we went wrong in the past." Alina ran her fingers over the book's cover, memory and possibility intertwining. "Mom," Aisha said gently, "whatever you decide, do it for yourself, not for Harold's memory, not for what might have been." Alina smiled at her daughter. "I've never made decisions any other way." She reached for her phone. "I think it's time I spoke with Richard directly. There are terms I want to discuss." 6 months later, the Maxwell Literary Foundation hosted another gala, this one to launch the Alina Jenkins collection and announce the first recipients of the Alina Jenkins Prize for Poetic Voice. The ballroom of the Westmont Hotel was again filled with the literary elite, but the crowd was noticeably more diverse than at previous events. Alina, elegant in a new midnight blue gown, sat at the center table beside Richard Maxwell. On stage, Jonathan Pierce concluded his introduction. "So it is my profound honor to welcome back to the literary world a voice we should never have lost, and to introduce the woman whose words have finally found the audience they always deserved. Ladies and gentlemen, Alina Jenkins." The applause was thunderous as Alina made her way to the podium. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked out at the sea of faces. "50 years ago," she began, "a young man named Harold Maxwell read a poem written by a 20-year-old black girl from Montgomery, Alabama. He could have dismissed it, filed it away, forgotten it. Many did exactly that." She paused. "Instead, he published it, and in doing so, he changed the course of that young woman's life." Alina glanced at Richard, who sat with his daughter Sophie, home from Berkeley for the occasion. What Harold understood, what his grandson Richard has come to understand, is that literature isn't just about beautiful words. It's about truth, sometimes uncomfortable truth, sometimes truth that challenges us to see the world through eyes not our own. She opened a sleek new volume bearing her name. Tonight, we launch not just a collection of my work, but a commitment to voices that might otherwise go unheard. The first recipients of the Alina Jenkins Prize are here tonight, 5 poets whose backgrounds and experiences represent the America that exists beyond boardrooms and ballrooms. Their work will challenge you. It may even make you uncomfortable. That's how you know it matters. As Alina began to read from her newly published collection, Richard Maxwell watched the rapt audience. His grandfather's portrait hung prominently behind the stage, added at Alina's insistence. Richard had resisted at first, concerned it might seem self-aggrandizing, but Alina had been firm. "This isn't about you or even about me," she had told him. "It's about acknowledging where we've been so we can see clearly where we're going." Now, listening to Alina's powerful words echoing through the hall his grandfather had built, Richard understood. Legacy wasn't what you preserved. It was what you created, what you passed on, what you made possible for others. As the evening concluded, Alina stood surrounded by the 5 young prize recipients, poets from Navajo Nation, East Los Angeles, rural Appalachia, Detroit, and a small town in Mississippi. Their faces shone with the particular light of those who have been truly seen for the first time. Dr. Reynolds approached Richard at the bar. "Quite a different energy from last year's gala," he observed. Richard nodded. "My daughter says we're finally relevant." High praise from a 20-year-old. And Alina. "How is your working relationship?" "Challenging," Richard admitted with a smile. "She questions everything, rejects half my suggestions, forces me to defend every decision." He watched as Alina embraced each young poet in turn. "It's exactly what we needed." Across the room, Aisha stood with Jonathan Pierce, watching her mother with pride. "She never stopped writing," Aisha said quietly. "Not through all those years of rejection, not through my father's illness, not through any of it." "Some voices can't be silenced," Jonathan replied. "Only temporarily unheard." At the end of the evening, as guests departed and staff began clearing tables, Alina found herself once again on the balcony. The city lights seemed different somehow, no longer a distant tapestry but a constellation of possibilities. The door opened. Richard joined her, 2 glasses of water in hand, an echo of their first real conversation 6 months earlier. "The board is thrilled," he said, handing her a glass. "Attendance records broken, media coverage beyond anything we've ever had. The first print run of your collection sold out in pre-orders." Alina smiled. "Is that all that matters, the numbers?" Richard leaned against the railing. "You know it isn't, not anymore," he hesitated. "My daughter has decided to intern at Maxwell Publishing this summer. She wants to work specifically with the Jenkins collection." "Smart girl," Alina said. "The future is in voices we haven't heard yet." Below them, the young poets were leaving together, animated in conversation, the night still young for them. "What happens now?" Richard asked. Alina watched the young writers disappear around a corner. "Now we keep doing the work, finding the voices, publishing the truth." She turned to him. "Your grandfather understood that literature isn't a monument to the past. It's a conversation across time between who we were, who we are, and who we might become." Richard nodded, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time. "Thank you for giving Maxwell Publishing a second chance." Alina's smile held decades of wisdom. "Second chances are rare in this world, Richard. The real question is what we do with them when they come." As they stood together in the night air, the past and future of the Maxwell Literary Foundation reached an understanding that transcended words, even for 2 people who had built their lives around them. Alina Jenkins had arrived at one gala as an unwelcome intruder. She left another as the cornerstone of a new legacy, one built not on exclusion, but on the revolutionary act of making space for every voice to be heard. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.